Today's lecture is going to comprise of some of the very, very important aspects of comparative public administration, which I am calling CPA issues. But before we go ahead with this lecture, let us look at what we did last time. We looked at public administrative systems globally and tried to find out what are the enduring features of these systems. We also tried to find out and explore what aspects can be compared and how they can be compared and why they require such comparison and what is the objective of all this exercise. We saw that we could make comparisons based on political and economic systems. We could look at different regions, like we talked about Punjab and Sindh and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa within one nation, or we could talk about international comparisons, intercultural comparisons. We saw how we could look at and compare the whole administrative system of one country with another or a number of countries, or look at different parts of the same administrative system and then compare it with a counterpart of another administrative system. And we talked about hierarchy and flow of communication and decision making, etc. And we also underline the importance of the processes which are at work within the administrative system and how they can contribute towards the successes and failures of the objectives of that administrative system. And we found that the most important and comprehensive way of looking at administrative system was in the ecological context, wherein we would see how all the cultural, political, and other variables impacted upon the performance of the administrative system as a whole. And we underlined the importance of the informal aspects of an administrative system. The flow of informal communication as compared to formal communication. The influence of certain informal parties and persons. The behavioral aspects of these persons when they were working in a group. All informal aspects. These were found to be as important as the formal aspects of an organizational setup. And last but not least, we were concerned about the performance of the overall administrative system, and we wanted to compare it with other public administrative systems. So the objective we found was to try and find out all those enduring features and those best practices from various public administrative systems with a view to improving our own, with a view to enhancing the performance and efficiency of our own public administrative system. A little bit about how all this happened, the emergence of the field of comparative public administration. Comparative public administration emerged as a field of study centered on the development and distribution of foreign aid. Very interesting. After the Second World War, there was this rebuilding effort, and of course, the United States in the forefront. And it was thought that if certain best practices of the Western and the American public administration system were transplanted into other countries where reconstruction was taking place, it would make them work more efficiently, and the public administration systems would become much better over there. So this is how comparative public administration started, and the concept gained popularity after World War II. Over time, the field has evolved in many directions, ranging from the study of administrative inefficiencies, policy implementation, budgeting, systems analysis and fragmentation, culture and public administration, and distributions of governmental power. We have already talked about these things in the last lesson, that now comparative public administration is a subject with many, many important aspects to it. When we talk of administrative inefficiencies, the idea is to make the system more efficient. When we talk about policy implementation, the idea is to implement policy in a manner for the benefit of the public at large. Not only implement that policy, but policy in the first place should be public friendly, the evolved policy, the formulated policy. Budgeting, of course, is always important. Money makes the mayor go, and you should know what you are spending on what and with what results. The concept of fragmentation, where a system loses its power to work as a whole and gets fragmented into smaller units, thereby decreasing the efficiency of the system. We already talked about the importance of culture and the whole ecology in the context of public administration. Another important aspect is the distribution of governmental power. Who is wielding how much power? Is it the Prime Minister? Is it the President? Is it the Cabinet? Is it only certain ministers? Is it only certain secretaries and heads of departments? And why? Who is exercising how much power and how it got distributed in that manner? Has there been patronage? Or all of it is according to merit and according to what the Constitution and laws of the land say? As stated before, the emergence of CPA as a field is linked to the process of decolonization and the expansion of nation states. In our own case, we were a colony of the UK. When the British left, we had to fend for ourselves and in fact, till now, our administrative system is a clone, remains a clone of the UK administrative system. So whatever legacy in the administrative arena was given to us by the British still goes on with a little bit of reform here and there. So CPA emerged when these nations got independence, including Pakistan, and it was decided and it was felt that comparing the administrative systems of these nations with each other and with those of the West will help in improving the state of affairs. So originally CPA attempted to help develop the administrative practice of developing nations. The idea was that if we train bureaucrats from developing countries, if we invest some money in their training institutions at home, or if we train them in best practices, the administrative systems of the newly independent developing countries would improve. So this attempt was made to do so. Money was spent on this, and organizations like Pakistan Administrative College and National Institute of Public Administration and Civil Service Academy of Pakistan, organizations of this sort came up in all developing nations, including Pakistan. Another idea or aspect forwarded by certain people is that CPA was conceived as a Cold War strategy to hold back communism. The West thought that if we can develop the administrative systems of these newly developed countries and clone them according to our system, we will perhaps be making a dent as far as the spread of communism is concerned. So there was this linkage with the USAID, because in the 60s and 50s and 60s and 70s even, USAID was very active indeed. It was providing a lot of money in various forms for various aspects to different developing countries in Asia, in Africa, Latin America. So USAID can be said as one of the forerunners or one of those inspiring the discipline of comparative public administration. Well, the objective, innocently stated, was to help developing countries to catch up with the developed world by improving the practice of the public sector. So the West wanted, especially the United States wanted, that the developing countries come up, become better, their public administrative services become better, they serve the people much more and help develop the country. So the developed world would improve and catch up with the so-called developing countries. This was the stated noble objective at that time. But things didn't go that way. CPA got a bad reputation. The profession's faith went hand in hand with the commitment of developed nations to international development, but that did not happen. The fact that most developing nations have failed to make the leap into the League of Developed Nations, and many were being labeled as failed states, put into question the professional practice of public administrators. So despite all that investment and all that training, it transpired that there was not much development taking place in the developing countries, the newly independent countries. Services were not being provided in the manner that they should be to the public at large in these developing countries. So at the end of the day, the CPA process was in a way blamed for not having been able to achieve its objective and got a bad reputation. Now some aspects relating to CPA, the patterns of organization. How is the organization designed to deliver something it is supposed to deliver? How are the various parts of the organization relating to each other if it has to deliver that? And again, most important part, the recruitment of bureaucrats. Are you getting the best people for this job? Or has a stage come when people don't want to come in for this job? The best people don't want to come in for this job. They have aptitude elsewhere. they see money elsewhere. They want to be in the private sector, or they just want to be architects and engineers, or artists or musicians. So what about the quality of intake of professional bureaucrats? How can you manage the standard of and quality of the people whom you are recruiting as bureaucrats? And once you have recruited them, it is the training which makes a lot of difference. Are you training them properly? Or are you training them as masters and not those who are meant to serve the public? So training, along with recruitment, is a very important aspect of comparative public administration. Is a bureaucrat in the African Republic of Rwanda serving the people better, or is a bureaucrat in Thailand or Pakistan serving the people better? We already talked about certain common programs of governments, and I had talked about the poverty alleviation programs, of which we hear a lot in many countries. But there can be many other programs, and many social welfare programs, many health-related programs. You can think of HIV/AIDS. These days we are talking about polio. Pakistan has a great polio problem. So when we talk about these certain common programs of government, we have to look at the best practices. This is where best practices can be very, very helpful. How was a certain country able to eradicate measles or tuberculosis? So we look at the best practices and would like to follow them to eradicate tuberculosis in our own country. Capacities and performance. We talked about patterns of organization, but even more important, design of the organization. Has the organization been designed to provide that capacity to be able to perform? Are there enough vacancies of bureaucrats of a certain type as required? Are the supervisory practices the way they should be? So these capacities, the mere number of people you have, the way you train them, the way you make them interact with each other, the team effort they may have, the kind of responsibility you give them, and the way you hold them accountable, all go into making sure that the performance is worthwhile. Once you have created the capacity, it is very likely that the performance would be what you desire. And then there is always this tension amongst officials, not just the politician and the bureaucrat, but amongst the bureaucrats themselves. They never go away. Every bureaucrat wants a plum post. Every bureaucrat wants to be the closest to the political master. Every bureaucrat wants to make as much as they can for themselves. So, because of these deep-rooted tendencies, there is a great tension amongst the echelons of bureaucracy. Well, I have to get ahead. I have to do this and I have to do that. I have to leave others behind. And mind you, that is not the true spirit of competition. So, once you are in the bureaucracy through a competitive process, are you following the true spirit of competition? Perhaps not. So this perennial tension between officials and bureaucrats can be subversive and undermine the performance of the overall administrative system. Again, what I mentioned before, personal norms and the control of bureaucratic power. Now, what are my personal norms? What are the personal norms of a typical bureaucrat in our country? They would definitely like to have as much bureaucratic power and use it the way they want, to whatever extent possible. Now, this is a very important aspect. How can the control of bureaucratic power be assured? We have to assure that bureaucratic power is not being misused. It is easier said than done because it is being misused all the time. So this becomes a very important aspect of comparative public administration. How have others done it? Or have they done it? Other issues: how do administrators or high-level bureaucrats manage the political environment and thereby influence the policy-making process? This happens all the time. Bureaucrats manage the political process, try to manage the politician in charge, try to manage the overall political weaknesses, and also have their say in the policy-making process. Now they've got a case for it, because if a bureaucrat has been involved in a subject for a long time, that bureaucrat becomes very, very technical and professional in that subject. So if we have to make a policy regarding that subject, one of the best persons to turn to for advice by the political master, by the politician, would be that particular bureaucrat who has been working in that affair for a longish period. And the bureaucrat would more than love to give that advice, because the bureaucrat wants to be close to the politician, and in the process maybe manage something for himself too, by inserting into the policy some such things which might be helpful to him or his friends, monetarily speaking. So a major issue in CPA is the policy-making process, how it goes along in a country, to what extent it is biased, to what extent have you included other stakeholders, other lobbyists, the civil society into the policy-making process? Or has the politician been able to capture the policy-making process also? In fact, if you look at certain administrative decisions, they may even be bureaucratic decisions and may not even have the blessings of the politician, but they become contentious policy issues. For example, this happens quite a bit in law and order situations, that the bureaucrat has to take an action immediately, and then the fallout is that the thing becomes a contentious policy issues. It could be how representatives of certain political parties are treated. It could be how protesting lawyers are treated, and many such examples. So sometimes administrative decisions become policy issues themselves, or they develop into policy issues, or they raise up policy issues. During the last decade, critics of the public service have argued that efficient government is small government, and as a result, privatization has been the order of the day. It's even before the last decade, I would imagine, because even if you look at our own country, that privatization has been touted as the way out, because it will bring in proceeds to pay off your loans, to start public welfare programs, and also to overall provide budgetary support to the budget. But unfortunately, does it happen that way? No, not at all. Privatization becomes the subject of cronyism, where you give out property or industrial setups or units of the government to your cronies, to your friends. And the kind of terms which are negotiated are not very favorable. So that very little funds may be coming up front. So at the end of the day, all those noble objectives which are connected with privatization may not ensue. There would be very little money coming in for welfare. And is small government really good? This is another question which we can ask comparative public administration. They say keep the government out of the life of people. Let it come in when it is absolutely necessary, not all the time. So, we have to look at the experiences of different countries who have gone this route of the small government and try to find out whether or not really small government works. There have been certain countries where the cycle has reversed. In Pakistan, we went in for nationalization, big government, then we went for privatization, small government, and continues like that. So the small government model was exported overseas, like the discipline of comparative public administration itself, especially to the new states in Africa, Asia, Eastern, and Central Europe and Latin America. Now we can look at all these states and try to find out to what extent has small government and privatization helped them and helped the public at large. Now, how representative is our bureaucracy? Of course, the real representative is the legislator, the person who gets elected from that particular constituency. But can bureaucracy work in a representative manner, that it shares the thoughts and the feelings of the people at large about certain things? That an administrator who is posted in a particular district manages to read the pulse of the people and act accordingly. And then affirmative action is a must. No one has to be left out. Is it easy to protect minorities under certain conditions? Are we providing equal rights to many a minority, be it religious or ethnic or gender-wise discrimination? Are we giving everyone equal opportunity? So one of the CPA issues is that we should, but how? How do we do that? Another aspect of CPA is about the budget. How is the budget formulated? Who makes all the decisions? Is it just the bureaucracy who is going to come up with a draft of a budget and the politician is just going to stamp it? And then it's going to go to the assembly and it will be passed? Well, that's what has been happening for a long time in our country. Budgetary decision making is extremely important. How much should we allocate for health? How much should we allocate for education? How much should we allocate for the army, for the military? These are very, very important questions. And who is going to tackle them? It has to be tackled by the representatives of the people, by the legislators, in accordance with the manifesto of the political party they belong to, in accordance with the promises they have made, and of course, keeping the welfare of the people at large in mind. So the process of budgetary decision making, the process of budgetary allocations is extremely important issue of CPA. And we can definitely learn in this context from many a country. Government reorganization. You know, sometimes we have 50 ministries, sometimes we have 30 ministries, sometimes we have 28 ministries. So how big should the government be? Should the government be reorganized from time to time to make it more efficient, to make it more responsive? Or should it become a white elephant, with each minister, each secretary, each politician having his own piece of the cake, all the perks which come with authority or otherwise? So we have had examples of trying to break one ministry into 2 or 3 ministries so that people could be accommodated and provided with the perks. This happens. So government reorganization should be in the positive sense. We should have a smart government which is responsive to the people and delivers through the public administrative system. And that public administrative system had better be good. Decentralization is also a very important concept. We have seen this happen in Pakistan. Certain reforms when the federal government was supposed to decentralize its powers to the provinces, and the provinces were supposed to decentralize their powers to the districts. This did happen to a certain extent, though, with the pros and cons and with people talking against it and people talking in favor of it. But at the end of the day, has the whole process delivered something? I'm not too sure. So decentralization, being an important issue, should be done in a certain spirit, with the spirit of being able to serve constituencies, public at large, at their doorstep. And it should not end up as political bickering between the various politicians concerned. It should not become something, a point of bickering between the Nazam and the local MPA. So decentralization spirit, unfortunately, could not be captured by us. And we can learn from others, I'm sure, in this regard. We can even learn from African countries in this regard. Privatization and contracting out. We did talk about privatization a little while ago. Contracting out, where you get things done which the government was previously doing by the private sector. For example, look at our highway system. We can contract out the toll to others. In fact, over history, Pakistan has been contracting out all kinds of tolls to private parties. Now, how does it work? But this is a small example. You can contract out huge activities, even hospitals, to private parties. So we got to look at the best practices in this arena also, whether privatization and contracting out can really be panaceas to our problems. Privatization, we saw, perhaps did not. We are again in for another round of privatization, and we'll see what happens. But contracting out has not been done in any on a major scale in our country. So we really don't know as yet, and we would like to definitely have the support of best practices from other countries to find out more about how contracting out can be a success story. And public sector reform, extremely important. What does public sector reform mean? It primarily means that you bring in reforms to the civil service of the country, to the administrative setup of the country, to make it more responsive to the people's needs. so that it serves the public, so that it becomes less wasteful, so that there is clarity in objective. So keeping all this in mind, we go through a process of what is called public sector reform. The last time mammoth exercise occurred in this regard in Pakistan was in 1973, when some public administrative reforms were made. We'll talk about this later. There are certain salient features of these reforms. But did they deliver at the end of the day? To date, we are still not sure. And we have been going in for certain mini public sector reforms in Pakistan. And unfortunately, perhaps they have not delivered too. So here too, we can learn from others. CPA can come to our rescue. We can find best practices from other countries to see if there is something worthwhile in there which we could replicate and which could help us do better. We can look at CPA through the lens of history. How has bureaucratic power been controlled over the ages by different rulers, be it the rulers of Prussia in Europe, be it the Mughals, be it the Chinese mandarins? How, from times immemorial, this concept of governing through administrative systems was designed and used. So we can look at all this background to see how things evolved and whether they evolved for good. So here we talk about the kingdoms of China, Asia, Africa, and Europe, which were precursors to the modern state system. So the state system which we have today did not just materialize from nowhere. It developed over a period of time, historically speaking. And it developed all over the world. In China, we had so many dynasties with their own system of mandarins. In Asia, we have the great example of the Mughals. In Africa, we had systems set up in Egypt and other countries. And in Europe, way back, as I mentioned, in Prussia, and then much of Central Europe, we had excellent replicas of what we call the modern state system today. Some more CPA issues. We talked of this one, the politics-administration dichotomy. Where does politics end and where does administration start? Where does policy making end? Where does policy implementation start? Where do the powers of the minister end? Where do the powers of the administrative secretary start? So, if you are living in a political content, this question will always be there, and it's an evolving question. It doesn't stop. Political environment changes, and political and administrative relationships change. Reforms come over, government is reformed, new political parties come up, new governments come up. But then the administrator has to some extent mold to all these changes. So the political content, the political atmosphere is extremely important when we look at performance of public administrative systems. because each government may want to steer the public administrative system in a certain direction which is more in keeping with its manifesto or its stated objectives. And the administrative system, which was tuned otherwise previously because of a different party being in power, will have to accommodate that, but of course the adjustment does take time. And then we look at the environmental and cultural factors. We have already looked at them very much so and found that ecology is an issue. You can't transplant one system to another from one ecological environment to another, because everywhere different components, different parts of the ecology, especially the cross-cultural part, would be very, very different. And is bureaucracy always negative? We can only look at bureaucracy as something very, very bad or bad. It is no positive side to it. And if so, should the bureaucracy very small and remain out of people's lives? Should the police remain out of people's lives as much as possible? Should the health worker remain out of people's life as much as possible? By health worker, I mean the public health worker. Should the public schools run by the government be meant only for a certain group and not for the elites? So is bureaucracy an impediment to many things? And shall we keep bureaucracy and government out of the lives of the people as much as possible? This is one question, and it ties up with that concept of small government being good government. Now, we did talk about the individual role definition before. How does the individual relate to the organization? And how clearly is the role of the individual in the organization spelled out? This is very important. And whether those monolithic socialization, the aggregate of individuals, is helping the development of a particular organization vis-a-vis other institutions. We can't have an imbalance. If in the overall administrative system, certain specialized agencies or specialized organizations are developing very well, while other institutions are lagging behind, then there is going to be a systemic effect, and we may not get the best that we want from the overall administrative system. Again, politics and CPA, very important. What did Woodrow Wilson mean when he called for the separation of administration from politics? In Wilson's view, politics ought to be about policy formulation and administration ought to be about policy implementation. But we know that there are no hard and fast rules about this. It just can't be so, because both are evolutionary. The best we can say is that the politician is primarily responsible for policy formulation, whereas the administrator is primarily responsible for policy implementation. But there are many overlaps. So perhaps the ideal state of affairs which Woodrow Wilson envisaged in 1887 cannot be a reality. So let us focus on the scientific efficiency of the nation states, which is the economic efficiency of government. And incidentally, this economically driven perspective has also been termed the new public management, a minority viewpoint which continuously recurs from time to time and essentially holds that the public sector ought to be managed like the private sector. So the new public management, people say that you can make government only efficient if you run it on the lines of a private sector. Now, would you like to run the government like any CEO of an IT company would run his company? Or any Seth in Karachi would like to run his company? Or any head of multinational would like to run his various units in various countries? The basic premise being that efficiency is only possible if you run things in a very, very private-like manner. So this idea keeps on recurring in the field of public administration, and very important for CPA because this is comparison of same administrative systems with different status. For example, the British administrative system, when it started working more on private lines and under Margaret Thatcher, can be compared to the older or the previous administrative system of the UK, when there was not so much privatization and government was not being run as if it were the private sector, and government was bigger. So this view is definitely there, it has its merits, but it also got some demerits, which we'll come to later when we go into a more detailed discussion of the new public management. So the moot question here is that to what extent and how can we run the public sector as if it were a private sector, using all private sector means and mechanisms. We will look at this question in more detail later. Again, political context, political context, political context, important. Almost every aspect of public administration is contingent upon a political context. Definitely so. Because if you're going to run new schemes, new health scheme, new social welfare schemes, new schooling schemes, training schemes, technical training schemes, they are all going to be led by the political people, the politician or the political party would have it said that we will be doing this and we are going to do this. And so when we come in power, we are doing this now. And it is the administrative system which is going to deliver all that. So it is correct that every aspect of public administration then becomes contingent upon the political context. Because administrative systems do not stand alone. They require some embracing organization some kind of imposed hierarchic order, something other than anarchy or chaos. Because an administrative system is a very disciplined system which cannot be chaotic. It has to have an order, and that order has to flow from the political side. If the politicians would not let that discipline flow in the organization, then it will become chaotic. So the administrative system is surrounded by the political aspect, and it's very important to realize that the interaction between the two do not lead to chaos. They should lead to order. Being dependent upon politics presents many challenges, not the least of which is how to study perfection, which can be said to be the quest of public administration under imperfect conditions. So now what we are saying here is that the public administrative system would like to deliver well, be perfect, but the political environment is imperfect. So the challenge is how the administrator and the political system engage together to ensure that something worthwhile comes out for the citizen. So the political system presents a challenge to the administrator, and the administrator should be able to manage and maneuver the political system in a manner that most things get delivered. So what we are saying here is that the political system is somewhat imperfect, and the administrative system is trying to be perfect in the sense that it wants to do public good, public service. This we have seen before, the importance of policy making and execution. It's an ambiguous one, the distinction between the two. The problem is that bureaucrats and agency-level executives often make discretionary choices and exercise initiatives which are just as much the development of policy as anything politicians could do. Very interesting. Policy, on one side you have that very carefully formulated policy. You have had input from many people and formulated a policy. All stakeholders, all vested interest groups, politicians, civil society, and you come up with a real policy. But in one capacity, executive of any public administration office, holding a public administration office, may be making a decision out of 2 or 3 options. He'll take one option, has to, because of certain circumstances and forceful events at that time. And that decision may be as big as any policy decision. Research in CPA. How important is research in CPA? We started off saying that we would like to have a science of public administration, a generalized science of public administration, equally applicable to country A, B, C, D, irrespective of their political and other settings. So can research help us do something in this regard? What could be the independent variables and the dependent variables under such a scenario? The independent variables would be, if you're trying to correlate them with the dependent ones, would be the environment or the context, That could be the societal characteristics, the culture, the politics, the type of government, the economic indicators themselves, management slants or core operating systems. These could be your independent variables, which you would like to correlate with dependent variables like the organizational structure itself, the leadership, the power, the influence, the internal decision-making processes, and whether goals have been accomplished or not. So we may like to develop certain equations, certain correlations here. And now another issue is that in CPA, instead of developing very rigorous theories, there is a tendency to theorize considering a few examples from time to time, more like case study approach maybe. So you can, of course, link these concepts better if you were to do a little bit of hypothesis building, a little bit more rigorous research, and test those hypotheses empirically. And we did talk about all those independent and dependent variables in this regard. So as far as research is concerned, we are still at a stage where no single theory can explain the science of public administration. Reform and capacity building. Comparative public administration is an applied, intercultural, interdisciplinary, explanatory field of study which carries out cross-cultural investigations in order to provide solutions for management problems and develop management technologies. So we're talking about the same thing here, except that we are saying very clearly that what we want to do, what should be the end result. It is to develop management technologies and to provide solutions for management problems. So we can identify those best practices which promote the most desirable organizational structures and processes for us. And all this can help us reform our government and to build the capacity of our administrative setup. A very interesting thing, one aspect which one can study in various bureaucracy and compare them, is how vested interests lock on to the bureaucracy. According to the interest group theory, the usual pattern is for a special relationship to develop between certain agencies and certain private interests. Happens all the time in Pakistan. Similar patterns involve government agencies becoming quite insulated from the public. Since you're becoming so close to a few people, you don't care for the rest of the people. You become insulated from the public at large. When an agency becomes encapsulated or isolated like this by a private interest group, bureaucratic capture is said to have occurred. So the concept of bureaucratic capture is that certain vested interests have gone over, developed their linkages with the bureaucracy, kept all the other parties and public out, and latched onto the bureaucracy for good. Now the extreme picture of this is what can be called ossification. The study of bureaucracy or bureaucratic politics often involves the study of the class characteristics of public servants. One of the most frequently used terms in these areas of study is ossification. A bureaucracy becomes ossified or set in stone by the way it goes about its work. This may occur regardless of political change or whether boundaries exist between politics and administration. Now this is where the bureaucracy has become very, very inflexible. The bureaucrats don't care about the environment. this government may come or that government may come, this political party may come or that political party, they will only work in a particular way at their own speed and layer. So they have been set in stone, they have been ossified. This is the worst thing that can happen to any bureaucracy. And on top of it, if that bureaucracy, as in our case it happens quite often, is already being captured by certain private vested interest groups, then where will the public go? So we have to look at CPA to find out how to keep ossification away and how to keep bureaucratic capture away. Thank you very much.